Cause fuck it, what's better to do? And I'ma never give a fuck, cause I'm better than you.
What's good? This is your boy Internal Sadist, aka the terrorizing internal sadist. Let me stop. No, but yeah, this podcast is going to be about uh basically what the title says, cuties, a teacher being fired, and my overall look at it and take on my overall look and take on it for all intents and purposes. So this is a bit of a much more closer to home thing that happened recently in my family. Um, so it's one of those things I'm gonna actually talk about. Um, so it's going to be definitely one of those things where actually what we're going to talk about in this lovely live stream is my thoughts as a father. Cuties. It's cuties. My thoughts as a father. U.S. versus European market. Private school teacher getting fired. Um, the marketing and my afterthoughts for all intents and purposes. So it's going to be one of them things where I'm going to touch on a lot of different things in this podcast that actually bothered me about the whole entire cuties thing, because it's about cuties for all intents and purposes. Um, Let me actually fix that whole entire title because it's supposed to actually have a semicolon, not a semicolon. It's actually supposed to have a instead of that, it's supposed to actually have this, which is actually pretty sucky. There we go, much better. There we go, much better. Excellent, Smithers. Excellent. No, but let me stop. But yeah, the thing about the whole entire Cuties movie that bothered me as a father is it wasn't the actual movie within its own self. It was actually the how it was marketed for all intents and purposes is what actually bothered me about the whole entire thing. So it was actually marketed very poorly, to be honest with you. But I'm gonna start with the whole entire thing, with the whole entire cuties thing, and I'm gonna start with the whole entire marketing aspect of it. If you look at the thumbnail to this video, it's that little baby with a book that basically say where they do that at. Research. I'm doing some research on where they do that at. So this is basically research on the movie and stuff like that, and the typical stuff that actually went into the movie and the marketing of this movie. I'm gonna start by saying, as a father, I didn't really approve of the movie because I actually have daughters. Understood where the movie was going with it. However, I will say some of the cut scenes and some of the you know the pan around shots were a bit much. It was like real ridiculous with the shit for all intents and purposes. So the whole entire zoom in and shit was actually a bit much for that movie. Um, but I did watch it with my daughters because it was a part of their school project. Hence, why I'm about to get into the whole entire private school teacher being fired. But I'm going to talk about the whole entire thing in general. What I'm going to say about the movie is Netflix marketed it poorly. I will admit that as a non-objective person, Netflix marketed the hell out of that wrong. They really did. They fucked that whole entire marketing up. I don't know who thought it'd be a great idea to do it, or who thought it would be, a brilliant idea to make that the poster. Because the sad part about that is, if you actually watch the movie, that poster, the original poster that they actually had, was actually the end of the movie for all intents and purposes. So that original poster was the end of the movie. Um, the sad part about that is, when I actually watched the movie, a lot of it bothered me for the fact that I actually have daughters, and my daughters were actually watching this movie as a school project, and it bothered me. It bothered me to the point where a bunch of parents got together, and that teacher no longer is teaching at that school. Is typically what ended up happening to that teacher, because apparently the principal didn't approve it. So somehow, some way, she was able to go around the whole entire school and a principal to actually get the movie to make it so that it's being seen. I don't know what she did, how she manipulated her I don't know how she manipulated her whole entire, what they refer to that as, her what the hell's in it, syllabus. I don't know how the hell she manipulated her syllabus to get it so it can actually pass, but she's able to do it. And needless to say, the principal wasn't too happy with that, because obviously they didn't do it at the school; they did it at home. So it was like a home. It was a home project that you basically got to write a report on, and bring it back to school. So it's one of those things where it's like I didn't really want to watch the movie, but I'm one of them parents. If my child got to watch it, then I got to watch it too, so I can make sure I approve of this shit. It's typically how the shit works. So I watched it. The Cartel Princess watched it, and three of my oldest children, my three oldest children basically watched the movie. So it's one of those things where like you look at the movie, and from a cultural aspect, you kind of sort of understand the movie. However, there were some things that went a little bit awry with the movie that were pointless, and I was really questioning why was it in the movie. It's like, wait a minute, why? It basically be like, you have a good movie, then you throw some random scene in that don't really need to be there or don't really need to fit. And it's one of those things that really bothered me watching a movie where they just did random things and over the top things for all intents and purposes. And it's kind of ridiculous because they didn't really need those parts to actually sell the movie. The movie basically sold itself, and they didn't really need that extra shit that they did, like the close up shots of like children, and like the whole entire scene with the whole entire the girl with her uncle, and her taking a picture of her hoo hoo wasn't really needed. It wasn't really needed to actually make the movie better. The movie was good without those scenes, and the movie was good without panning into little girls dancing like they were. That was just wrong altogether. Um, what I will say about it is Netflix marketed the hell out of that wrong, because that's not what the movie was actually about. It wasn't about a twerk team or nothing like that. It wasn't about a girl joining a twerk team and living her best life. The sad part about that is they marketed it so wrong, it was ridiculous. They marketed it to the point where like what they were actually saying and what was actually happening in the movie were two totally different things. Then on top of that is the whole entire marketing thing when it comes to the markets. The problem with the markets is what you can do in Europe is totally different than what you could do in America. Movies that you can actually show in like European indie films are perfectly fine in Europe. You can't take those European indie films and turn around and actually try to play it the same way you would in America. Because the sad part about it, and the funny thing about it, when it comes to Europe and America, the stark differences is European people view sex differently than Americans view sex or sexualization. Like Europeans speak freely about sex, whereas Americans are very conservative about sex. You see what I'm saying? So it's one of those things where it's like you can't sit up here and take something from a market where they're very liberal about sex and bring it to a market where they're very conservative about sex and sexuality for all intents and purposes. Now, don't get me wrong. When it comes to politics, Europeans are more conservative than Americans. Americans tend to be more liberal about shit than actual like the European countries when it comes down to it. Because Americans actually talk about openly talk about beating up politicians and shit like that. Whereas in Europe they think about it and they probably won't say it out loud. Whereas in America, they'll literally think about it and say it out loud. So it's one of those things where it's like they should have probably tweaked the movie to fit the American market for all intents and purposes. Because leaving the movie as is and bringing it over to the American market was the worst thing that they did. They probably should have tweaked it, rewrote it, re-edited some scenes, and basically made it work to the point where, like, they can make it work properly. Whereas, like in America and in European countries, they view sex way differently than they do in American countries. They like I said, they talk freely, they talk openly about sex in European countries, like we talk openly about beating up our politicians. or wanting to off one of our politicians in America. So they're very open about sexuality, like we're open about wanting to, do bodily harm to a politician. That's typically how that works. So we're conservative about sex. They're liberal about sex. They're conservative about their politics. We're liberal about our politics. On no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, both sides actually talk openly about beating up a politician, no matter how you like it. In America, it's typically how that works. Now, my overall problem with the movie, like I was saying, is The fact that they tried to take it from the European market and actually bring it over to the American market without changing anything to actually make it for your U.S. consumption. Because the sad part about that is, if you've ever seen any type of European movies or any type of European indie movies, they're very, very open about their sexuality in those movies. Whereas you couldn't bring those movies over to American market and then try to label it as like rated R. Some of those movies are going to be rated NC-17 or you know um, X-rated for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's like you have to basically be able to you know be able to know your market. And this is where Netflix really fucked up. This is where they fucked up and dropped the ball. They didn't know they tried to sell a notion to a market that they knew nothing about. It's like they thought that the market would be open for this, or they probably did it on purpose, just to do it on purpose to basically make it so that everybody's okay with the shit. When in fact, not everybody was okay with this shit. If you actually go back to their page and look at it, not everybody was okay with it. Um, now, now we'll say this: the teacher who pitched this idea to us, our children, and actually made us watch it at home with our children, or made our children try to watch it at home without us, was fired. She was fired from her job. She no longer works there. Along with another person that was actually fired, that was above her. She was also fired too, for for not keeping track of what the teacher was actually putting out there, apparently, or for approving her syllabus. He's basically fired for that. So now there's two open positions at the school: a teacher and a supervisory type position, basically, for that teacher. So whoever's the head of her, the person that's the head of her studies is basically that position is open. It's basically like a college. Like if you go to business, you got the business school teachers where they teach business and stuff like that. Then you got the person above them in administration that approves their syllabuses. That's simply how that works. So this at the private school is basically the same thing. You got the teachers, then you got the people that are above her studies that actually approve her syllabuses for her particular studies. Let it be social studies. You got that person. Let it be sciences. You got a person above them. Let it be English and reading. You got a person above them. That's simply how it works. So she was fired, and she no longer has a job, and she's probably been blackballed from ever teaching again. Is what I'm willing to bet. I would be shocked, or a school would be hard pressed to actually hire her as a teacher for all intents and purposes after that stuff. So it's one of those things where like everybody knows, and she's been fired, and she's pretty much been blackballed from probably teaching again. So she would have to literally go to another state and start teaching again. Um, my overall views on the movie is, like I said, Netflix marketed what Netflix put out there. It would actually happen in a movie is drastically different. Um, I was appalled by some parts of the movie, like I said, certain scenes that didn't really need to be in there to sell the movie, and stuff along the lines of that. And the fact that my children actually, this was literally something that my children had to watch, and somebody actually approved this shit. So I was bothered about that as a father. Now, the overall thoughts on it was being a person that could be unbiased, very unbiased about things, and looking at it from a cultural standpoint, and or unplugging myself from it mentally, basically. It was, at the end of the day, this is going to be spoiler alert for people that didn't see it too. At the end of the day, it was actually a learning experience for girls who were really going through this for all intents and purposes. So how Netflix pitched it and how the movie actually went, how the plot in the movie actually went, was two totally different ways. Because you would think that she breaks free and she went on to live her best life, when in fact she really didn't. She basically dove into this stuff, and she got more depressed and more depressed and more depressed and more depressed and more crying and more depressed. And the sad part about that, at the end of the movie, she eventually decided that this is not for her. It's really not for her. And she literally ran out and quit. Now, I say a spoiler alert for everybody that's watching this. She literally ran out and quit. And at the end of the movie, you basically see her playing hopscotch. Some form of hopscotch or jump rope, basically. I think it was hopscotch, basically. She basically was playing hopscotch at the end of the movie, and she was dressed. She wasn't dressed as conservatively as she was at the beginning of the movie, and she wasn't dressed like she was during the rest of the movie. She basically had on a. She basically was clothed properly, but she wasn't, Muslim clothed. She was like, you know, her body was covered. Only thing that was shown was her arms, and she was wearing some pants. And she's out there playing with the other girls in her neighborhood. So it's one of those things where it's like it's a growing movie for all intents and purposes. But there were some parts in there that was bothering to me, that bothered me a lot, that was very cringy. That I was like, that wasn't even necessary. Why the hell? Why the hell why the hell would you put that in the movie? So there's parts in there that was unnecessary, that did not need to be in there in the least bit. I can name like I can think of three parts off the top of my head, but I'll let you watch the movie and figure that out yourself. But it's one of those things where it's like, those three parts did not need to be in the movie. Those three parts, I want to say, there's even like a fourth part where it's like, was that necessary? Was that even necessary? But I'm gonna say there was at least three scenes definitely that didn't need to be in a movie, that they could have sold the movie on. With Barry MS. Yeah, it is. It definitely is. It is. It is definitely. It would. It definitely was. It definitely was very controversial, especially for the American market. Like I said, what you do in what you can do in the European market is totally different than what you can actually do in the American market. Because if you ever seen like European films, especially French films and some Russian films, what they actually allow in indie films is totally different what they'll allow in America indie films. Because at that point you're actually slapping labels on it, like labels like above rated R at this point, or you're slapping NC-17 on shit for all intents and purposes at that point. So, or you're slapping for mature audiences only. So it's one of those things where it's like what they did and how they portrayed it was just wrong. The sad part about that, it was nothing like how they were actually trying to make it out to be in their whole entire advertisement. I will say that. However, it was still wrong. It was still done wrong for the market in mind. So they basically overlooked their actual market and basically went on and did it the same way that they did it in France, only in English. Um, so it's one of those things where it's like Netflix needs to know their market a little bit better, obviously, because it's one thing to do it in France or a European country. It's another thing to do it in America. The best way I can describe that to you is everybody knows about Dragon Ball Z. Everybody loves Dragon Ball Z. Everybody knows about Dragon Ball Z. However, where I grew up and watched Dragon Ball Z, it was literally done the exact same way it's done in Japan. So all the extra shit and all the stuff that was taken out for the American market, like children smoking or drinking, sexual innuendos, um, things that look like phalluses or shafts or titties, were all taken out. Well, it was done. It was dumbed down and PC down for the American market, basically. But if you grew up in the Spanish market, animes weren't dumbed down or watered down for children in the Spanish market. We literally got to see a person smoke. Literally got to see a young kid smoking a cigarette or drinking alcohol or anything along those lines. This is typically the difference between the American markets and elsewhere, because the American markets are very conservative about what you can do and what you can actually show to people. Whereas like elsewhere, it's like fuck it, free country, do what you do, and it's simply how that works. So it's one of those things where it's like, let me see what you're saying. It's funny why would it they just mainline the movie into American theaters so haphazard. Basically, it's one of those things where it's like you also got to take consideration too with feminism and women empowerment. They basically did it because they thought the market would be ready for that type of stuff. The sad part about that is the backlash. The backlash on that film trailer showed otherwise. The backlash showed otherwise. But the sad part about that, they greenlit it anyway. So it's one of those things where it's like the people on Netflix weren't thinking properly when they did it. Like I said, they could have probably reworked a lot of the scenes just for the American consumption, but they didn't. They literally left it the same way they did for the French audience, the same way they left. They basically did it the same way they did for. They basically left it the same way they did for the French audience, only in English. It's typically the only thing that they really changed. Um, so it's one of those things where it's like, at the end of the day, they basically messed up on the North American side of things for all intents and purposes, because North America is not about that life for all intents and purposes. When it comes to children, we're not about that life. Whereas in Europe, they're very open about that life. They're willing to do stuff like that. Matter of fact, certain European countries, you're allowed to drink when you're like what, 13, 14 ish. In certain and other European countries, you're allowed to drink with your parents' consent. So if your parents okay it, you can actually drink drinks like wine and shit like that. But the sad part about that is, like I said, they messed up with not trying to alter the scenes to fit the market that they were trying to push it to. And it's one of those things where like people thought money and this, that, and the other, and the get woke, go broke mentality that they have is basically what they were doing. So like they thought dollar signs and everybody's going to love this because it's twerking and hip hop videos, and I'm willing to bet that's exactly what they were thinking when they tried to market this shit. Hip hop videos and this, that, and the other, and everybody loves Nicki Minaj's WAP and this, that, and the other, and this, that, and the other. Let's do it. I don't think WAP actually came out. I think WAP came out after that, but I know the song was out way before that. But the video was out. I think the video was actually shot. I think the video was probably shot just before that too. But it's one of those things where like they basically, just rushed it without thinking. Because apparently Netflix got deep pockets enough to just waste money like that for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things. And it's just what it is for all intents and purposes. It's like you really can't go back or take it back now. It's out there, and they're committing to it for all intents and purposes. So a good example of that is like I was talking about this in a live stream with other people, where it's like in America, you have to have warning labels or poison labels or hot labels or other shit like that, because apparently people don't learn their lesson or know anything. Whereas in Latin American countries, there's none of that. We don't got caution hot. We don't got, warning poisonous. We don't got, dangerous chemicals. We don't got, a fire, a flammable or anything like that on any of the shit that we actually have in Central America. We pretty much just know that shit is dangerous for all intents and purposes, which actually blows my mind because I've never seen so many warning labels until I came to America. I've never seen a Mr. Yuck sticker. I didn't know what the fuck warning hot was. Like, I knew that shit was hot, so I didn't really need those stickers to know that I could burn myself for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's like, we never need caution. But in America, apparently they do, unless they're like dumbing, which makes me think, are they dumbing people down to the fact where like, they don't know, they can't think for themselves that stuff is hot or not? And it's simply one of those things where it's like, it literally actually goes to show you of the dumbing down in the society for all intents and purposes when it comes to that type of stuff. Because if you need labels or caution labels or warning labels or anything like that to basically let you know that something is wrong, off, poisonous, and can kill you, what's that actually say about the actual society of people who live in it? Like, think about that. If you're from a third world country where you ain't got none of the finances and none of the trappings of a first world country, and you see that they have like warning signs and all this stuff going on, you tend to wonder, how smart is society really? If you need all this stuff on here, do you realize that, in America, basically everybody's pretty suit happy. So now you got to put labels on shit because people are too stupid to actually be able to use common sense. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah. And that's typically what I think happened with Netflix. They didn't really use their common sense, and they let the agenda actually go to their head, and this is typically what happened. And it is what it is. There's no way they can take it back. There's no way they can rescind it. There's no way. I mean, they can, but it's too late now. It's out there. It's really out there. So it's one of those things where like they can't even do anything, and they're probably not going to do anything because they pretty much doubled down. Um, Probably not. I couldn't see her getting pregnant at her age. I really couldn't see that. I just can't. Um, yeah, yeah. And the sad part about that, once you think about it, for you to need all these labels and all these warnings and all these caution signs on things, obviously survival instincts are very horrendous. Obviously, in America, we lack the survival instincts that we actually need. A mass majority of people actually lack some survival skills or the common sense that you actually need to survive in the world. So, what's that say about the society? Was it done on purpose, or was it done by accident, or do people just or people just generally dumb? Like, think about that. But my overall thoughts on the whole entire thing, because I don't want to keep everybody hostage for a long period of time, is do I feel bad for the teacher who actually tried to go around the faculty and the or, the person? No, she deserved every bit of it. She's fired. Now she can't get a job teaching and destroying children from here on out. You can't come to a private school doing some stupid shit and not expect to have a job after it's done, said and done. We actually pay attention to our children because we actually pay for our children to go to the school. Therefore, we ain't got no problem with having you removed. That's typically how this shit works. Because ain't nobody that's going to a private school or sending their children to a private school is going to let this shit slide without you being reprimanded or let go. And that's simply how this shit works. And the sad part about that, she was fired literally the next day. We all sent in emails before we even got to the PTA meeting. She was fired. She was fired. We all get emails letting us know that she would be no longer working with us and she would no longer be a teacher and she would no longer be a person at such and such school for all intents and purposes. It's simply how it worked. That word was worded. So it's one of those things where it's like she abused her power and karma got her. So it's one of those things where it's like, sucks being you. But at the end of the day, my overall thoughts on it is that movie was a good learning tool for the realities of the day and what everybody's going through and over sexualizing children. The sad part about that is, and this is basically one of those things where it's like we always talk about everybody loves the truth until it reflects them or is about them, and that's pretty much what this movie basically did. It basically took all the stupid shit that we're doing in American society with the slut walk and all this other stupid shit by exposing our children to like the gay pride parade and the drag story time and having strippers on poles at elementary schools and shit like that, or having strippers for children birthday parties and shit like that, just stuff along the lines of that. So we're literally over sexualizing our children. That even goes for toddlers and tiaras and shit like that. So it's one of those things where it's a learning experience, and this the reason why people are upset, because it's basically betraying the exact same thing that these feminists and women are trying to push for their children onto them, and it puts it on his head. So I'm willing to bet you any money a lot of the feminists that are upset with this movie, and a lot of people that are upset with this movie, are upset with it because that little black girl didn't continue her I can't even say that word, twerk career. And I'm willing to bet that for any money about that. The reason why a lot of feminists and people are upset with it is because it literally showed their hypocrisy on TV. And now they're trying to say, well, that's not us. We don't do that. That's exactly what you do. That's exactly what you do when you drag your children to the gay pride parade. That's exactly what you do when you drag your children to, toddlers and tiaras and stupid shit like that. And, strippers at elementary schools and, all this other stuff. That's basically what you're doing to your children. You don't realize it, especially when you got them out there, like, look in hot pants, looking goofy. Like, I remember because the funniest thing about that movie is, I remember when the movie was over, I looked at the Cartel Princess. The Cartel Princess looked at the girl. She goes, I swear to God, there will be shovels bought, and you three will be digging your own graves, and I will put you in them. Exactly what she said to the dog. Exactly what she did to say to the three older girls. I swear to God, There will be shovels bought. You will be digging your own graves, and you will be put in them. If you even think of some shit like that, that's what you said. Everybody pretty much not in agreement. It's basically like, yeah, we don't want that. No, we don't want to be digging our own graves. Yeah, no, pretty much no, we're good. We're never going to do nothing like that. Nope, no. So it's one of those things where like even a cartel princess didn't co-sign on that shit. So what does that say about society? We're ran by majority of society is ran by a minority of the society. A majority of the society is led by a minority of society. A small fraction of society is literally taking control over the majority of society. Because the sad part about that, those whole entire third wave, fourth wave feminist views don't reflect the whole entire fucking country as a whole. Don't get me wrong, there are some women that that want some of that shit, but at the end of the day, those views don't reflect the whole damn country. That's a small section of women and people who follow that are subscribed to that shit for all intents and purposes. So what that lets me know is the cartel prince is not subscribing to it. There's a lot of other mothers who are not subscribing to that in the least bit. This is typically why I probably got like over a million thumbs down, and it barely made it over 10,000 likes. I think it was the last time I looked at it for that trailer. So it's one of those things where it's like Netflix did fuck up and they dropped the ball on this one. They really did. They over sensationalized it way too fucking much. And the way they pitched it and the way the actual movie went was too what's the word I'm looking for? Two dire opposites. That's probably not the word I'm looking for, but that's what word I'm going to use. It was drastic. It was two drastic opposites. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. At the beginning, it's like one of those things where she's going through this phase, but then at the end of the movie, it's like she actually comes to her senses and realizes that she's unhappy. It's basically like the best way I can describe it to you would be like feminists, women who are feminists that run around here, women power, women are the future, women are this, that, and the other. Then when they hit a certain age, you hear them in op-eds talking about, well, this is not what I was expecting it to be, or this is not what I wanted it to be, or this is not how I wanted it to work out. It's typically how it works. It's typically how it is. Think of a feminist that basically went through the whole entire feminist indoctrination and then coming to her senses later talking about, I don't waste all my time doing this. And now I realize that it was wrong and I'm going to speak up about it. That's typically why you get all these channels with these women that say, I was a feminist and I was wrong. Or I was a feminist and here's what I learned on my journey to being conservative, or like, leaving the feminist culture or the feminist ideology. This is typically why you get these op-eds or people that do this shit. So it's one of those things. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, true, very true. And the sad part about that is like feminists actually learn this shit the hard way, and they basically have a come to terms a moment or come to God moment basically, and they always make videos about how they did something wrong or how what they believe was way wrong, or they believed it so strongly, and they were always talking about how they always talk about how violent the Trump supporters are. Meanwhile, they're the most welcoming supporters, and who they were following were the most violent supporters. Like, think about that shit. So when you hear this stuff, it's one of those things where it's like, that's literally what happened in this movie, only the girl actually got out at a younger age. She didn't continue on with the bullshit, basically, and she was actually smart enough to know that this isn't for her. This is destroying her. This is eating her up inside. This is not what the life that she wants for herself. So the sad part about that is at the end of the movie, she settled for basically in the middle. She didn't really go fully back to the whole entire full metal conservative of the Muslim faith dress garb, and she wasn't like how she was dressed throughout the movie, where she had crop tops and hot pants or skirts and shit like that. Basically, she wasn't dressed like that. She basically went back to a regular shirt, short sleeve, a regular short sleeve shirt that actually came down to her, came down past her belt, and she had on pants, and she was playing outside like a regular old girl would normally play back in the day in America. So she went for something. She went for a look smack dab in the middle. She didn't go Muslim extreme look, and she didn't look like the half the heifers that's running around her now for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's like you literally have to basically be able to understand something to the point, and you have to be able to understand your market that you're trying to pitch something to. If you don't understand your market and you oversell something that your market doesn't want, you're going to run into problems. That is the overall problem with a lot of people when it comes down to it, is they try to oversell something that they shouldn't try to oversell, which is sad. It's very sad to watch that. Why would you do something like that to a market that's not keen or swift on over sexualizing children for that much? It's one thing if you kept it in the French market, or it's another thing if you would have brought it to the American market and alter it so you can actually fit your market, the market that you have in mind. That's the thing about marketing and stuff like that. And you're selling and marketing. Just because something's fine over here doesn't mean it's going to be fine over here. Or a good example of that is just because something sells in a Chinese neighborhood doesn't mean it's going to sell in a black neighborhood. You actually got to alter it so it can actually fit the market you intend to sell it to. Let it be different branding or different avatars or stuff like that. You have to market something to fit the market that you're trying to sell it to or pitch it to. You can't keep something the same from one market and bring it to another market if you know your market's not too keen or too swift on you doing shit like that. Just because you think everybody's willing to get woke or go broke, that don't mean everybody's comfortable with sexualizing children. Because the sad part about that, last I checked, as I can ascertain, nobody's comfortable with sexualizing children. You're fine with actually bringing sexual imagery around children, but nobody's fine with actually sexualizing children. Unless you're talking about toddlers with tiaras, which is a whole other thing, and that's a small subsection of retarded ass people that do stupid shit like that. That's simply how that works. But the sad part about that, overall, nobody in America is okay with over sexualizing children. Nobody's okay with that shit. There's not a person alive that's okay with, well, there is people alive, but that's a small subsection. Majority of the people alive in America aren't okay with, sexualizing children. There's a small majority that is. Then you also got pedophiles that are. But at the end of the day, majority of the people aren't that, and they're not okay with it. So you kind of sort of had you tweaked a couple scenes, maybe change up a couple scenes to actually fit the American market, while still trying to still trying to depict what you're trying to actually sell in the movie. You can do that if you have proper writers and you write it properly. You can predict. You can depict what you need done in a movie if you have proper writers to do so, without actually having to take it that far. Is what I'm saying. The sad part about that is, like I said, a couple of those scenes didn't need to be in there. You could have wrote it in a way where it wasn't something that needed to be actually done. For all intents and purposes, is typically how that works. And the sad part about that is they totally missed the mark on that. And they thought maybe because they like it in France, they'll like it in America. What French people like and what American people like is two totally different things. Like I said, you can't take a French movie and impose it on an American population. Not everybody likes European movies. Not everybody. The sad part about that is a lot of people get uncomfortable watching European movies altogether because not everybody is willing to actually open their mind and understand another culture. Whereas in America, it's like we need it for us and us only, and we don't want that shit over here. And that's typically how that works when it comes to various, even cartoons like Dragon Ball Z I talked about. Like Dragon Ball Z in America is way different than Dragon Ball Z in Latin America. And it's simply how it works. That's simply how the market works. So it's one of those things where you have to learn your market and understand your market. Because the sad part about that, there's a lot of countries who actually have cuties or mignons, whatever version of it you want to think of. Let it be mignons, the French version, or cuties, the American version, the Americanized version. A lot of countries actually have them on their block list. So if you have Netflix in another country, You're not allowed to watch that movie unless you change your VPN, get a VPN to basically change the country you're in so you're allowed to watch that movie. So there's a lot of countries that actually literally blacklisted that movie. Both those movies, let it be the French version and the English version, it's been blocked by a lot of different countries. It's pretty much how that works. So it's one of those things where it's like, you have to know. Yeah, and the sad part about that, what's up, JD Mouse? You do have sick people, individuals actually defending that shit. And there are sick individuals, and I'll call them out on it. The only reason why I watch the movie is because I'm one of them parents. If my children are watching it, I want to know what the fuck. I want to know what the fuck's going on and what they're watching. So it's one of those things where either I need to watch it first before I let my children watch it, or I'm gonna have to watch it with my children so I can actually explain to them why this is not a good idea. Basically, as a parent, because that's typically what good parents do. Like, you're not going to just a bad parent would basically put their child in front of anything and say, well, it's okay. And another thing that bothers me about this movie is, it's funny how we want to take away violence from children, but we want to put sexually explicit images in front of children. So violence is wrong, sexualizing children is right. Like, make that make sense to me. So, anytime I show, it's wrong for me to show my son Laszlo, an all-out shootout scene that's brutal and gory. I'm wrong for that. But for you to want me to force me to actually teach my children or show my children a movie where they're over-sexualizing girls, that's right? Like, how's that work? So it's fine for thee, but not for we. Is basically what I'm getting from that one. It's fine for you. It's fine for thee, but not for we. I mean, it's fine for we, but not for thee. And it's simply how I view that. That's technically why I made that live stream not too long ago, because at the end of the day, that's pretty much what that harkens back to. It's fine for you, but not for me. Like, think about that. This is typically how Hollywood treats everybody. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah. Yeah, and the sad part about that is that actually happened. That was actually a scene that actually happened. There was a couple scenes like that where it's like, that wasn't even necessary. You could have wrote that in a way where you didn't really need that scene in there. To be honest, you could have wrote that in a way where you didn't really need to have that scene. And the sad part about that, this is typically how you know when somebody has good writers and bad writers, because you really didn't need that scene. You could have wrote it in a way for the public to actually understand it, or you could have did a cut. You could have did a cut scene, and then had her at school. You could have had her going in the room and locking her door, and did a cut scene from that, and basically had what the fallout from that the next day. It's typically all you really had to do. If they wrote that properly, you wouldn't have to put that scene in there. And this is how you know when people have bad writers or poor intentions when they do it. So it's one of those things where it's like, Netflix really fucked that up. They really did fuck up that marketing. Like I said, there's like 3 scenes I could think of off the top of my head that I wasn't okay with in that thing that could have been written out or written around better, so they didn't have to actually portray it in that way. They could have wrote it in a way where they didn't need those scenes. And it's just facts. The sad part about that, like I said, at the end of the movie, the cartel princess basically said, I want y'all 3 to look at me. I will buy shovels. Y'all will dig y'all graves, and y'all will be in them by tomorrow if you think of doing some shit like that. If you ever think of doing some shit like that, there will be 3 shovels bought, and y'all will be digging y'all graves, and y'all will be in them. Literally what she said to the girls. And me and all the girls were basically in compliance and saying, yeah, no, we're not for that. Yeah, that's definitely not happening, because, yeah. It's going to be very hard to explain why 3 of the girls are missing for next year's Christmas party. For all intents and purposes. And it's one of those things where, like, you have to be able to, like I said, like, Netflix dropped the ball because they didn't quite understand their market that they were trying to pitch it to. They over sensationalized it, and they tried to pitch it in a way where they thought everybody would be okay with it. And meanwhile, nobody's okay with it. Nobody's okay with it. But the sad part about that, they're going to keep on going through with it. And that's the cold hard truth. So it's one of those things where it's like now apparently they're losing money and losing subs, they're losing subscribers hand over fist. Since last month and to this month, they've been losing subs hand over fist. So it's one of those things where it's like, where do you go from here? How do you better yourself? How do you rebrand yourself or recover from shit like this? For all intents and purposes, that's basically one of the things that they is basically what it is. How do you recover from this? How do you rebound from this shit? Do you want to rebound from this shit? Do you want to still be seen in this light? Because the sad part about that is like even a lot of the responses that Netflix was responding to people, like they were basically all bold up until like, a lot of people go, so what about the fact of this that, we feel as though you're supporting pedophilia and you're basically advertising this and there's a lot of pedophiles out there. Their response was generic. All they said was, we at Netflix put on content that we believe that is diverse for all our viewers, is basically what they responded with to a lot of the people who are watching it and actually had a problem with it. We believe in the diverse choice of movies and films and shows on our platform that can fit everybody's needs and this, that, and the other, this, that, and the other. Was a generic excuse that they actually gave a lot of people who actually have a problem with this. And that's the cold hard reality of the day is like, this is a society we live in where corporations can literally like give a generic excuse on why they're doing something or why they're able to do something and get away with it without even blinking or having any moral you know having any morality in the whole entire thing to actually fully understand how this actually depicts their actual views. They're basically trying to detach themselves from the fact that they actually co-signed on this shit and make it seem like as if it's make it seem as if it's that's not what they're trying to do, or that's not what they're trying to promote, or they're basically trying to be not avant-garde. What's the word? They're trying to actually be very generic about their responses to that because they know they fucked up, but they don't want to admit that they fucked up. So basically, anytime somebody know they fucked up and they give a generic response to something, they know they fucked up. And typically, if you actually ever argue with Netflix via email or via Twitter, they'll basically give like some wholeheartedly thing. But the minute they were faced with this problem, they gave a generic response. Anytime they face any other problems, well, we at Netflix believe this and that and the other, and we're sorry that you feel this way, and this, that, and the other, and this, that, and the other. Is normally how they respond to anything else, any other backlash. But this, it was very generic. Like it was like they're basically trying to sell it and stand behind it and try to be very PC about it in the response. So they gave you a very generic response to it. And that's typically how that shit played out. So what didn't I cover in the stream already that I've been talking about? I've already talked about the teacher that promoted this shit at the school was fired. My views as a father, I basically touched on that very little. As a father, I was very disappointed in the teacher and Netflix. To be honest with you, I was very disappointed in the teacher and then and Netflix on top of that. So it's one of those things where it's like I was very disappointed as a very creative person. They couldn't write this properly to the point where they could take those scenes out of the movie and don't really need those scenes. They really didn't need that full-on scene. And I know that they panned away from it, but the fact of the matter is you basically know what happened. You basically know it was there. You basically know what happened. They could have just, showed a scene of her locking her door and closing it, and that could have been it. They could have wrote it in a way where like that just happened, and it panned to the next morning where all this shit and everybody was seeing the outcome to what she did behind closed doors. You could have did it that way. We didn't need to see this child like this. Is pretty much what I'm saying. So it's one of those things where I'm very disappointed in the creative aspects of how they actually portrayed this and how they actually did this. I'm very disappointed as a person who actually makes content and makes animated movies and makes child friendly content on YouTube for children. I'm very disappointed in how they actually went about this. If I could write this properly and not have to worry about it, you should be able to write it properly. Hell, there's sometimes where my anime goes a little too far, but we're able to write it in a way where YouTube won't sit up and go, you know what, Tico, we're pulling that cartoon. We'll give you a community guideline strike for that cartoon for being very gratuitous, despite the fact that it's for people over 18. We got to give you a strike on this. It's typically how that works. So, and the sad part about that, I know that I can't write something a certain way, even for adults, without catching a community guideline strike from YouTube for my adult Spanish anime. So I know this shit. So why is it that, something like this can be pushed and actually done so carelessly and so callously? Like I said, as far as the movie is concerned, forgetting about those two or three scenes, if those two or three scenes weren't in the movie would be perfectly fine. Those two or three scenes kind of sort of messed it up for me. The fact that the girl actually came to her senses that they had a come to God moment at the end of the movie and just left that whole entire thing and just forgot all about it and decided that this is what she wants to do and go back to her normal life. Not quite, risque looking and not quite full metal Muslim looking. She basically went for a look that's smack dab in the middle of those looks. She basically, like I said at the end of the movie, she had on a t-shirt that only showed her arms and came down past her belt loops, and she basically had on some pants. And she's outside doing hopscotch with her new group of friends, or her old group of friends, however you want to look at it, in their neighborhood. It's typically how it worked. So it worked out really, really nicely in the end. The sad part about that is that's pretty much the reality of the United States, despite the fact that we don't really want to look at it or we want to throw it under the rug and pretend like this is not what we're doing to our children. This is exactly what we're doing to our children. This is exactly what we're doing to our children. It's funny how we can be hypocritical about a movie that depicts this when in fact we're actually doing the exact same fucking thing to our children that's portrayed in that fucking movie. You can't be hypocritical about shit. It can't be one of those things where it's fine for thee, it's fine for we, but it's not for thee. No, it's literally throwing a mirror on exactly what the hell you're doing to your children, and you can't be unhappy with it because now you're being a hypocrite. Because this is literally what's happening in the Western society today. It's literally what's going on in Western society today, and this is my total afterthoughts on the bullshit that's going on with this whole entire thing. This is my afterthoughts. This is literally exactly what we're doing to our children, but now that it's been depicted by somebody else who's not American, now you want to be upset and clutch your pearls now like, oh my God, bitch, this is what we're doing to our children. Act like it. Quit trying to escape responsibility and actually accept the fact that this is what we're doing to our children in America. This is what we're doing to our children in the Western world. You can't act shocked and clutch your pearls when somebody else is doing it when you're actually doing the exact same fucking thing to children. You can't do that. This is basically that mirror image that I always talk about. Like, you have to be able to step outside yourself and look at everything around you with a 360 view. Or you got to be able to reflect on yourself, literally reflect on yourself. The reason why it bothers me is because I'm actually doing the exact same thing, but it's okay for me. And this is basically how a lot of the people are actually looking at this. It's okay for me to do it to my children, but it's not okay for Hollywood or Netflix to portray this in this way about my children, because I don't see it that way. I see it this way. The sad part about that is you're looking at it with blinders on, and this is exactly what you're doing. You're basically trying to pass blame onto Netflix when you're doing the exact same thing as Netflix, and and you're doing the exact same thing as Netflix, and the creators of this movie are actually doing. The sad part about that, this is not what the actual director of the movie had in mind when Netflix actually did it and portrayed it in a certain way. Is not what she had in mind. The sad part about that, the movie was actually made for a French audience, where something like that is actually acceptable for a French audience or a European audience in general. where the way she wrote the movie wasn't acceptable for American consumption. You would have to go back, tweak it a little bit, and change it up a little bit to make it consumption, make it consumable for the American palate, for all intents and purposes. This is where Netflix dropped the ball, and this is where Netflix fucked up. So Netflix got to eat this now. And the people who actually are railing against it are literally the same people who are literally putting their children in the same predicament. The same people who are railing against it are literally the same people who are literally doing the same fucking thing or depicting their children in the same damn way that this movie is depicted. So what you can't say to me is like, I'm not for this movie. Okay, but your daughters and toddlers and a version of another version of toddlers and tiaras, or you got on a twerk team, half dressed, dancing around in front of grown ass people. What part of that actually says you're against this? Like I said, that's that mentality that is fine for we, but not for thee. That's pretty much what it is. Like, it's perfectly fine when they do it to their children, but it's not okay when somebody actually shows it, puts a mirror up in front of them and shows them what they're actually doing to their children. Then it's not okay. This is where I get pissed off with hypocritical people, because now you're being hypocrites and you're doing the exact same fucking thing that this movie portrays. And now that pisses me off to no end. Now I have a problem with you doing this stupid shit. I've already had a problem with the movie, but at the end of the day, like I said, the movie was actually made for French consumption. It was not made for English consumption. This is exactly where Netflix dropped the ball at. They should have probably tweaked it a little bit so it can actually fit American consumption. We're not French people. They have a different outlook on life and sex than we do in America. Like I said, in European countries, they're very liberal about sex. They talk about it freely. They talk about it openly. In America, we're very conservative when it comes to sex. As long as somebody's not doing it to my children, and as long as the parents is doing it to the children, they're perfectly fine with it. As long as you're not trying to actually force it upon them, they're perfectly fine with it. However, in America, where our politics are totally drastically different, in a European country, they're very conservative about their politics. And in an American country, we openly talk about beating up our politicians openly and freely. That's typically the difference between the two realms in the two countries. They're open about their sexuality. They're very liberal about their sexuality. We're very conservative about our sexuality. They're very conservative about their politics. We're very liberal about our politics. Even the conservative people in America talk about openly beating up politicians. So there's nobody that's actually exempt from this. Hell, I've talked about beating up politicians on both sides of the aisle. So there's nobody exempt from this. There's nobody in the least bit exempt from this, conservative or liberal. Because when it comes to our politics, we're very liberal about beating up politicians in America. We talk extensively about what we would do to that politician if we see them in public. We talk openly about if they were hanging off the side of a building. We make memes about this shit. If they were hanging off the side of a building, would you save them? And most of the people will say no, or some of the people will say try to blackmail them into giving them money. That's simply how that works. So we're very open about what we would do to our politicians publicly, whereas over there, they're not really open about what they'll do to their politicians. So it's one of those things where it's like, you marketed it wrong. You could have probably tweaked some things that made it better for U.S. consumption. Yes, they could have done that, but they didn't. And that's where they fucked up and dropped the ball. That's my afterthoughts on this whole entire thing. They could have tweaked it, wrote it a little bit better, so they could depict what they needed to depict in the movie. So they didn't really have to show those scenes. You see what I'm saying? They could have literally wrote it better where they didn't need to do that, but they didn't. And that's the sad part about it. This is typically one of those things where, like, everybody always talks about lazy writing, but you're a hater or you're a bigoted because you're basically trying to understand why they wrote it this way or why they didn't write it better. Like, you're being a hater or you're being racist or misogynistic, all because the people didn't write something properly or write a scene properly to make the movie better. All because of lazy writing. And that's technically all it really was lazy writing. Had they had somebody that was in a room, in a writer room, saying, instead of doing this for the American market, because we know how this is going to pan out, how about we write it in such a way that's very intelligent where we don't have to worry about offending the American market. You see what I'm saying? It'd be no different than Star Wars being done differently in China to make the Finn a background character instead of a main character. You see what I'm saying? So it's one of those things where it's like you have to be able to understand your market and who you're actually trying to sell to. You have to be able to understand the group of people who you're selling this to actually be successful at marketing and sales. If you don't understand that, you can't be mad at the people for not wanting to take it. If you write a poor story or have a poor storyline and have a poor plot or write a poor plot, you can't be mad at the backlash you're going to get or the amount of people that's not going to show up to buy tickets or purchase your shit. You have to learn how to actually do it properly. You can't do lazy writing and expect people to show up. Unless it's some really, really crazy, obscene action movie. That is the only way you can get away with doing some shit like that. If there's a bunch of explosions and a bunch of excitement going on in movies, then you can fuck up a plot. You can pretty much not even have a plot in the movie. You can pretty much just make it so they just stumble upon it's basically a series of random events, basically, that makes it so they're in this action scene. You can really do that with action movies, but you can't do that with movies that you're actually trying to that need a storyline to do it properly. Good example of a movie that had a sucky plot was Expendables. Everybody watched it because of the explosions, guns, high-speed chases, and shit like that. The plot had a bunch of holes in it and was all fucked up, but people still went to go see it. It is what it is. So that's my overall thoughts on the movie. It could have been written a lot better. It wasn't as bad as Netflix. It wasn't as bad as Netflix marketed it to be. However, there were some scenes that were very bad that made me cringe and made me like, literally, grab my rosary beads and clutch my pearls. I'm a guy and I don't have no pearls, but I did clutch the rosary beads several times in that movie. So it's one of those things where it's like they could have wrote it better so they didn't have to show those scenes. They could have wrote it better so they could depict that a lot better where they didn't have to go into detail and having your mind racing like, what the fuck? Basically, because there's at least 2 or 3 what the fuck moments, like what the fuck moments that literally popped into my head and had me actually saying that literally out loud, like what the fuck what were y'all thinking when y'all did this shit? Like I could have wrote that better to the point where like you didn't even need those fucking scenes. Hell, I could have had my 6-year-old write that better where you don't even need those fucking scenes. So I know somebody there could have wrote that better to depict those scenes differently for all intents and purposes. But y'all didn't, and y'all got lazy about it, and y'all did some lazy writing, and this is how we ended up with this mess. It is what it is. So my overall thoughts on it is, yes, Netflix dropped the ball. Yes, the movie wasn't palatable for American consumption. It is palatable for French consumption and various other European countries, but it's not palatable for American consumption, U.S. consumption for all intents and purposes. And that's typically where Netflix fucked up. Overall, the movie had a good plot and it had pretty good pacing and stuff like that. However, those scenes basically, made it so that it made it like horrendous or ridiculous. Outside of those scenes, if they'd wrote those scenes a little bit better or got rid of those scenes and depicted it a lot better, the movie was great. Outside of those scenes, outside of the marketing and those scenes, the movie was great. I will admit that. However, those scenes basically made the movie suck for me. Like if those scenes weren't in there and they were depicted properly, I would give the movie about a 4.5. However, because of those scenes that they actually showed, I'm gonna have to give the movie a 2 or a 1. Like legit, that's exactly how I feel about it. Because of those scenes, I have to give the movie a 2 or a 1. Without those scenes, if they were written properly, the movie would be a 4.5 for me, most definitely. However, with those scenes, I'm gonna have to give it a 2 or a 1, unfortunately. A 2 or a 1 out of 5 for all intents and purposes. So that's my honest opinion on it. Netflix, you fucked up. Netflix, you really fucked up. You misread your market. You really misread your market. Other than that, everybody have a blessed day. Be good to yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk do nothing but spoil yourselves. And always try to look at stuff objectively or unbiasedly for all intents and purposes. So you can actually understand things properly in the mindset of the opposite side and the mindset of people for all intents and purposes. Y'all be blessed and have a good night. I'm sorry I held you hostage for this shit. At the end of the day, Netflix fucked up and that teacher's fired and her boss is fired for signing off on that shit. That's all that mattered to me, that they no longer have a job at the school, that I got to pay exorbitant amounts of money for my children to go to. Because for those three to go to school alone, I'm already paying like over $110,000 for them to go to school a year for just those three kids. So you can imagine what I'm paying for Laszlo on top of what I'm paying for them to go to that school. So I'm happy that I got the immediate response that I actually got from the school, and those two motherfuckers no longer have a job, because that pissed me off as a parent. So I'm glad that the school moved swiftly after emails and shit like that over the weekend. That teacher would no longer be with the school come Monday. I was pissed on Friday when I had to watch this movie because my children shouldn't be watching this shit. Needless to say, that teacher was fired over the weekend and she no longer has a job. I'm happy with those results. So, if you're going to be one of those teachers that's going to try to push this narrative, just know there are a bunch of parents like me who pay for their children to go to school, not to learn some BS or be exposed to some BS. We want actual educations for our children. We don't want this side-ass BS for our children. Just know your ass will be blackballed from teaching ever again. Only way she'll be able to teach unless she takes her ass to another country or another state completely. But the sad part about that, there's probably a high chance that she's probably blackballed in the whole entire United States. I would not be shocked if she can't teach in Canada. It is what it is. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to be one of them liberal teachers, you might want to mind your P's and Q's when you actually try to expose our children of people who actually pay for a great education for their children. You might want to mind your P's and Q's next time on what you can and cannot do at a school where motherfuckers actually pay top dollar for their children to go to school. It is what it is. Now your ass out cash out without your fucking job now, because you thought it'd be a great idea to do some stupid shit like this. Just know, cancel culture is real on both sides of the spectrum. Just because y'all think y'all good at it over there on the left-hand side, when a lot of money's involved in some shit, just know motherfuckers will pull money real quick and be asking for their money back, and the school had no choice but to react to this shit. So cancel culture is very strong on the money side. Anytime somebody got money, just know you're going to be bitch slapped out of your position. That's typically how that works. Because we pay too much fucking money for some dumbass liberal to try to push some shit on our children. We will cancel your ass real quickly. We will cancel the school real quickly. So the school knows this shit, and now you ain't going to have no job no more with the school, and you probably won't have a job in the lower 48 states for all intents and purposes when it's all said and done. And I'm happy that you don't got no damn job, because you can't be pushing shit on our children, especially if we pay for a top dollar education for our children. You're not going to be pushing shit on our children when we pay exorbitant amounts of money for our children to go to school there. One of our children alone, before taxes, depending on what grade you're in, like let it be 11th, we'll say 11th or 12th grade, we pay $27,500 for our children to go to this fucking school. If your children are 11th and 12th grade, we're paying like 32 to 33,000 a year for our children to go to school at this school. So your shenanigans is not welcome at this school. That's pretty much how this shit works. Your shenanigans, you can take your shenanigans elsewhere. But that's all I'm going to talk about. Hi, Manly Load, and everybody I showed up late to the stream. Thanks, JD Miles and the Manly Load, for coming to the stream. Thank you, Shinobi One. Thank you, JD Miles. Thank you, MGTOW the Wind. Thank you, Baron Yam. And I think Americas was in here at one point, or I might be wrong. But thank everybody for showing up at the stream. Thank all the lurkers in the background. Y'all have a blessed day. Be good to yourselves. and always be willing to learn and expand your mind, and be 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 a, be very open minded, and be willing to learn, and be unbiased for all intents and purposes. Still keep your wits about you, and your conservatism about you, but be willing to have an open mind and learn new things, and learn about shit fully instead of actually judging shit before you actually see shit. Um, yeah, y'all have a blessed day and be good to yourselves. Good night. Adios.